G'day Grumpies and welcome to Grumpy Old Bloke Goes Through His Vinyl Collection. Today we're doing Black Sabbath Part 2, in which we will have an Ozzy sandwich which spans approximately 41 years. Before we kick off with this week's episode, I'd like to start off with a correction. For some reason, there was a problem in the editing. Well, the problem was actually me. However, where we left Tony Iommi during the recording of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath was in a dungeon. When they'd finished their Dungeons recording, they went back to Willesden in London to do the post-production and the finishing off. Now, whilst they were doing that, in the studio next door was a band called Yes, who were recording Tales from a Topographic Ocean. Now, as part of the mutual exchange which goes on between bands in studios, they decided, clock to that side, Rick Wakeman decided to come, or offered to come and do the keyboards on Sabracadabra, and consequently that's what happened. So Rick Wakeman actually appears on this album. His fee for doing so was a pint of beer, so I think both sides did pretty well out of that. Another issue that came out of this album is, whilst they were in post-production, Black Sabbath friends Led Zeppelin, you may have heard of them, came along just to hang out, being sort of friends from the Birmingham area over the years. Now, during that period, they had a jam session. That jam session was recorded. It has never been released. I can't think of anything more exciting than a Black Sabbath Led Zeppelin jam session. If anyone knows where I might be able to hear that, that would be amazing. The mid-late 70s were a challenging time for Black Sabbath. Times musically had changed significantly. Punk was on the rise. Don Arden, their manager, had signed ELO and the music was going in that direction. And there was a lot of pressure on bands in those days to move forward, to develop, to play whatever was considered modern. Today, a heavy metal band releases a heavy metal album, then that's great. But in those days, there was a kind of pressure to keep up, and Sabbath weren't immune from that. They were in the studio recording this next album, Technical Ecstasy. At the same time, the Eagles were in the studio recording Hotel California. Apparently there was quite a lot of white powder floating around at the time. Now, this album, people like to hate on. I gave it another listen. I've always sort of assumed that it was a weak album, but I gave it another listen, and I really like this album. Now, the issue comes, I believe, from the fact that it's not like the other 6 Black Sabbath albums. They were trying to move forward. They were trying to do something a little different. And if you listen to the first Black Sabbath album and this album, they're a totally different band. I would say this was more hard rock, heavy rock than the Doom riff mushes of old. However, this album came out in 1976, I think it was September. Here is your track listing on the back, side 1 and side 2. Now, personally, for me, Backstreet Kids, You Won't Change Me are great tracks. She's Gone, Dirty Women, they're all really good tracks. So I think the problem is when you are a band like Black Sabbath, you're compared against your earlier work, and some people just want you to keep bringing out the same albums over and over again, and I respect Black Sabbath for doing something a little bit different. The artwork was by Hypnosis. It's supposed to be, or it is, who am I to judge, 2 robots shagging on an elevator. So there you go. By 1978, Black Sabbath were in a mess. Drugs, alcohol, too much touring, too many albums in too short a time, who knows, but the band really had enough. 1978 saw the release of the last recording of the original lineup of Black Sabbath, and that album was Never Say Die. Album cover again by Hypnosis. This album was the first Black Sabbath album I ever bought. The reason I bought the album was because of the track Never Say Die, which I heard on Top of the Pops, a television program in the UK, and thought, wow, that's amazing, not having heard anything quite like that before in 1978. As a result of that, I bought this album, and I actually am really attached to it. I really like it. Here's the inner cover. And as you can see, it's still going. Now, what can I say about this album? It's very eclectic. If you'd listen, again, this is a perfect match. It's the perfect pair with Technical Ecstasy. Again, they seem to come in pairs. This is very eclectic, as I said. It's a little bit more of a jazz feel to it. Again, a bit more heavy rock, a bit of prog. It's actually quite eclectic. There are a couple of good heavy rock tracks on here as well. Never Say Die being the obvious choice. Johnny Blade is another second track on this album that I really like. And so because I have a close affinity to this track, and it was the first one I bought, I am quite fond of it. Now, many fans don't like it. Again, I think a lot of that is to do with the fact that they were trying to go in a different direction and trying to be modern and do stuff that they weren't really all that comfortable with. Additional to the band, Don Airey actually plays on this as well, and Don Airey is a keyboard player who's played with many, many bands over the years. This album cover was the second offering by Hypnosis to Black Sabbath. The first one was a surgeon's hands in gloves in front of a green gown, which then got used by Rainbow on Difficult to Cure. The track listing doesn't actually appear on the album cover itself. It does appear on the inner sleeve. So there you go. As I've said, the track listing wouldn't really mean much to many people that weren't really heavily into Sabbath. But for me, the whole of side 1 is a really good, solid album. Side 2 gets a little bit more challenging, and you've got to be pretty hardcore to really sit through it. But Breakout and Swinging the Chain, if you think about it and put them in context with the last tracks that the original lineup of Black Sabbath ever released until 40 odd years later. So this is 1978. It's their 8th album, so that averages around about one a year by my calculation. And again, a phenomenal output. Whether you like all the albums or you only like a couple of them, a phenomenal output. And what an influence that band has had on music over the years. This is my original copy. It's on Vertigo on the Spaceship label. There you go. And just for good measure, I bought the Rhino Records version that came out as well. This is the American version, so this is slightly more glossy in its finish. And it has the track listing on the back, whereas the British version doesn't. The inner sleeve is the same, but it's a slightly different coloration, slightly different texture. Whether that's just the re-release version or it's accurately reproduced the original, I don't know, because I've only got the British version of it. And the label, of course, is on Warner Brothers. So there we go. 1978, the end of an era. 8 months after the recording of this album, Ozzy was out of the band. However, they did manage to squeeze in a tour before that, and the band that supported them on that tour was one Van Halen. So like AC/DC Black Sabbath tour, Van Halen Black Sabbath tour, wouldn't mind seeing that one either. I love live albums. It always struck me as a real shame that there was never a quality live album by the original lineup of Black Sabbath when they were at their peak. This album, Live at Last, I bought on the grounds that I love Never Say Die, and I thought, well, I've got to listen to this band live. They are going to be awesome. Little did I know at the time. This was released in 1980. It was actually unofficial in the fact that the band didn't have any involvement with it. It was released by their record label and their management without their permission. Now, listening to this album again, the track listing is pretty impressive. But having said that, there are little signs, I don't think you can even read it on here, signs that this isn't official is, for instance, there, I don't know if you can see it, Ozzy Osbourne spelled O-S-S-I-E. A little bit of a concern. Look, the band were amazing, they were a great live band, this was a average recording. It's very muddy. The band were really not on really good form. It was recorded on 2 nights, I believe, in Manchester and London on the tour. Tony Iommi never really gave permission for this to be released. It has been re-released since, I guess, as part of complete packages. If you're looking to hear Black Sabbath from this period live, I really don't know what to advise you. Probably listen to the original albums and imagine it live. This is really not a good album. It's disappointing because, as I say, it was the second Black Sabbath album I bought, so I bought Never Say Die having heard it, and I thought, wow, a live album by Black Sabbath. And I felt that I'd blown my money at a young age on this album, and it actually put me off Black Sabbath for a while. Something's about to happen that rekindled my interest, as I'm sure most of you would know. But for a completist's perspective, yes, you have to have it. Have I ever listened to it? Not for years, nor am I ever likely to be honest with you. I've got much better recordings than Black Sabbath. The label itself is quite nicely done. There you go. But my advice to you all is steer clear of that one. The Sabbath aficionados amongst you will know what happened next. But 1980 was a new decade, and Black Sabbath were a new band. Should they have continued under the moniker of Black Sabbath? Well, that's up to an argue. However, what did happen was one of the greatest rock albums, I think, in history. This, Heaven and Hell, was released in April 1980. Ronnie James Dio has one of the best voices in rock, let's be honest. He was an amazing singer, and one of the very few that didn't actually need a microphone to hit the back of a room. Incredible. This was recorded over the space of about 4 months, the end of 1979, beginning of 80. It happened as the result of a chance meeting between Tony Iommi and Ronnie James Dio, and on a couple of occasions, and they decided, well, seeing as they were both Ronnie was in need of a new project and Black Sabbath were in need of a new singer, it sort of made sense to give it a go. And apparently when they first met up, the first track they worked on was Children of the Sea, and they wrapped that up within a day. Black Sabbath with Ronnie James Dio was a very different offering to what had gone before. The album artwork was inspired by a 1928 photograph of three nuns smoking outside of a church. This album was produced by Martin Birch. Martin Birch was the first time they'd used an outside producer since Master of Reality. Martin Birch later became well known for producing Iron Maiden. In fact, this album was released in 1980 when new wave of British heavy metal was really beginning to gain some momentum, and you can hear that influence of Martin Birch and the influence of new wave of British heavy metal on this album, although I would argue this album was more influential the other way around. I bought this album pretty much the day it came out. Here's your track listing. There you go. Very much an album of two sides. The first track was released as a single, Neon Nights. Children of the Sea, they still play live. Well, they played live when Ozzy obviously wasn't in the band. Lady Evil, not so good, but it's an okay track. Heaven and Hell, what can you say? It's one of those all-time rock classics. It's a masterpiece. Side 2, not so good. Wishing Well, Die Young's a really, really aggressive track, very powerful. Walk Away, I don't think they played a great deal. Lonely Is the Word, which is the last track on side 2, for me, as one of the best Tony Iommi guitar solos. And the thing that really winds me up most of all about that track is he's really getting wound up and really getting stuck into the guitar solo as they fade it out, which is so frustrating. I'd love to hear an original of this or an uncut version of it where they just let him finish. That was absolutely incredible. Brilliant album. Great place to start with Sabbath if you're not so keen on the Ozzy period, and it's just one of those albums I absolutely adore. I'm extremely attached to this album, and in fact I bought this album only having heard Neon Nights, the reason being Black Sabbath and Ronnie James Dio. What could possibly go wrong? Not very interestingly packaged, apart from I love the sleeve. I mean, it's iconic. On the Vertigo label, this is the UK version, as we've already said. Just plain inner packaging, nothing more flash than that. This is also the last time Bill Ward appears on an album. I was also very fortunate to see Black Sabbath on the Heaven and Hell tour. And I'm trying to remember who supported them. I think it was A to Z, or it might have even been Girls' School, I'm not too sure. But however, that was an amazing experience for me, and the first time I got to see Ronnie James Dio live. And very fortunately, I got to meet Ronnie James Dio in person a little bit later, but we'll come to that when we reach his solo stuff. In 1981, Black Sabbath returned to Record Plant in Los Angeles and produced Mob Rules. Mob Rules was released in 1981. The band now consists of Iommi, Butler, Ronnie James Dio and Vinny Appice, or Vinny Appice, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Vinny having replaced Bill Ward during the Heaven and Hell tour in the previous year. This album was also produced by Martin Birch. There's your cover work there. It's all very anarchic, very imposing. Track listing on the back there doesn't come out all that well. My personal favourite on this album is Voodoo. The live version of that is incredible. The Mob Rules is a really powerful track. Sign of the Southern Cross. A little bit like Heaven and Hell. This is a very strong album. I would say it's slightly weaker than Heaven and Hell, but Ronnie James Dio's voice on this is, as usual, ethereal, incredibly powerful. And I think what you found with Ronnie singing in Black Sabbath, that it enabled Iommi and Geezer Butler to actually express their musicality a little bit more, because they were less restricted by, whilst Ozzy, was a great singer, he was nothing from a musician perspective of Ronnie James Dio. So it actually gave them far more scope to be able to play differently and expand their musical sound a little bit more. That and using an external producer, which allows them to bounce their ideas off each other and explore. Again, bought from new. This is the British version again, of course. There you are, original Black Sabbath album on Vertigo. Again, nothing particularly flash about the cover. It's very simple. There's no inner cover, there's no lyric sheet or anything like that. Love this album. As a pair, I would happily see Black Sabbath release Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules as a double album. I think, like all their albums, they're a perfect match. I really enjoy this period of Sabbath. Now again, very much open to conjecture and very contentious issue. Ozzy was the singer of Black Sabbath. Dio was a singer with Black Sabbath. Had Black Sabbath renamed themselves Heaven and Hell, which they did obviously later on when they came back as a reformed band, I think this album would be taken these two albums would be taken even more seriously. They are both brilliant albums. So not only did Black Sabbath inspire heavy rock and heavy metal, and I've already argued earlier on that they had a significant influence on grunge as well, I would argue that these two albums were significantly influential over the new wave of British heavy metal as well. So here we are, Black Sabbath, by my counting, have now inspired 4 musical subgenre. Now, as I said earlier, I love a good live album, and very few albums are better live than this one. This is Live Evil, Black Sabbath's first official live album sanctioned by the band. This was recorded in April-May 1982 on the Mob Rules tour, and released in December 1982. It's an album shrouded in conspiracy theories and he said, she said, but you can't argue with it musically. It's a great blend of old and new. The track listing on the back there, I won't bother reading it to you, but what this album did, amongst many other things, is actually show just how good Ronnie was, because Ronnie could carry off the old Black Sabbath songs with his own style, certainly, but giving the songs new life and new breath, and being able to perform them live with great consummate ease, and some would say improved on many of them. The album was also brought out in a little bit of a hurry for contractual reasons, because the band had just signed a new management deal, a new record contract deal, so they were keen to try and extract as much financial gain, shall we say, out of the recordings as they possibly can. Nothing does that better than a live album. That, combined with the fact that Ozzy Osbourne had just released, I think it was Speak of the Devil, which was a double live album that consisted just of Black Sabbath tracks. Anyway, this particular version, again, it's bought when it came out. Double album. There's the inner sleeve. Can you see that? Here's sort of pictures of the boys. I'll open up the front cover for you as well. There we go. So there's an awful lot of controversy said around this album. Tony Iommi and Geezer Butler said, reckoned at the time that Ronnie James Dio had been getting too bossy and trying to bring his vocals up in the mix. Ronnie said, in his own defence, that Geezer and Tony were so affected by external interests that they probably had lost their musical ear. All of these things are possible. I don't know, but whatever that happened, the result was a brilliant live album. This is the album that the Live at Last really should have been. It's an absolutely incredible piece of work and highly recommended. The album itself, as I say, comes on Vertigo label. It's a double album, both on Vertigo. And one thing I did find really interesting, other than the fact that I obviously need to re-sleeve these, are the fact that home taping is killing music. So just you bear that in mind, ladies and gentlemen. And so Black Sabbath come to the end of another generation. We have the original Ozzy lineup, we have the Dio lineup. Now Sabbath go through a range of different singers, different lineups, different sounds over the next 20 years. I have most of that stuff on CD. Among my favourites would be The Headless Cross and Tyre. I would argue that, same as many would argue with the Dio period, that perhaps the Black Sabbath should have gone under a different name. And in fact, Tony Iommi did try, both with Ian Gillan and Ray Gillan and Tony Martin, to try and record with a different name, but the label insisted on using the Black Sabbath name. Now, as a Black Sabbath fan, that's a little bit sad, but I suppose I understand the the pressures that would have been on him at the time, seeing as Tony Iommi was the last remaining member of Black Sabbath, and probably had more to do with the writing and the arrangement and the production of their music than just about anybody else in the band. So if anyone had the right to carry it on, it was he. There are some really good moments in the intervening few years, and I certainly suggest that you dig them out and have a listen to them. However, I don't have any of them on vinyl, so the next vinyl I have, we are stepping forward quite a long time. There was also, of course, the reunion of the Ronnie James Dio lineup with Vinny Appice, Butler and Iommi on the Forbidden album. I personally didn't really like that album a great deal. I do own it, of course, but I think some of the magic, or certainly the original magic that was on Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules, they didn't really recapture it. It sort of sounds a little bit of a cynical exercise to me. However, when they did reform as Heaven and Hell in the early 2000s, they were back on form. I'm not going to set myself up as a Black Sabbath expert by any means. I love the band, but by no means an expert. This next album took 10 years in the making. 10 years of reforming, deforming, Ozzy doing his solo stuff, Geezer doing his solo stuff, Heaven and Hell, Ozzy's various antics, falling on and off the wagon, and Tony Iommi's unfortunate diagnosis of lymphoma, which we hear he's got through successfully, so that's great news. So, to cut the very long story reasonably short, in 2013, the album 13 was released. So 43 years after the release of Black Sabbath, or 44 technically, this was finally released. This is the original lineup of Black Sabbath, with the addition of Brad Wilkes on drums in place of Bill Ward. Brad Wilkes of Audioslave and Rage Against the Machine. Unfortunately, it said that Bill Ward was offered a contract that he felt that he couldn't sign. Read into that what you like. It would have been lovely to have Bill on here, but such is life. So 13 is, we imagine, the very final offering from Black Sabbath in the studio. Your guess is as good as mine. It may not be. This album cover features a 3 metre, I believe it was, 3 metre wicker 13 that was set on fire for the album cover. Good album cover, sort of stretching the point a bit in the middle. I think this is a lot of wasted real estate, and it's a little bit of a wasted opportunity for a much nicer inner cover. Track listing. This is a return to form, I have to say. This is far more original Black Sabbath, very sort of that doomy, heavy, threatening sound that one expects from Black Sabbath. There are a few issues, as far as I'm concerned, with the sound on the album, however. It was produced by Rick Rubin, and as such, I don't know, maybe he's using the nu metal approach. It has that very compressed, muddy, dry sound, which just doesn't sound right for Black Sabbath. It sounds a little bit too compressed, I would say, for another word. So maybe Black Sabbath have inspired nu metal, or maybe vice versa, who knows. Anyway, this album it's a good way to sign off. It's lovely to have the guys back together and hearing them do what they do best. It's not their greatest album by any means. Some might argue it's better than the previous two that the original band released. I would argue that it isn't. But look, it's a good album, it's a good solid album, and you're comparing it again against the Black Sabbath history rather than against what else is available right now, and this far outstrips what else is available predominantly right now. As far as the album's concerned, as I say, it's a double album. There we go. Love me swirlies, they are just awesome. Still after the Black Sabbath one, just a subtle hint there for you. And that is pretty much it for what I can say about this album. It's a good, solid album. It's a good way to sign off. I think a live album would be a best way to finish up though, don't you? Almost finally, I do have one more little treat for you. You may have to wait a little longer. The end. Live album played at their last ever gig in Birmingham, their hometown, on 4th of February 2017. This came out in November 2017, but the recording was from that last gig. This is the culmination of 47 years of musical history in various directions by all members of the band. But after 47 years, this is we would think, the final offering from the band. Although, given its history, you never know. However, this is a triple album. Opens up beautifully like that, so you can see the stage, see the finish there, and the back track listing on there. As I say, this is a triple album, really beautifully packaged. I'll show you the inner sleeves for all three albums. Each one features a various member of the band. So the first album, funny enough, has got the Oz on it, with the track listing on the back. Album number 2 has Mr. Iommi with the track listing on the back. And album number 3 has Mr. Butler with the track listing on the back. I do like the fact that there's 2 tracks on each side of this last album, one of them being Paranoid, which is, 3-minute long, so I'm trying to think how long they can last that, how long they can stretch that out. As I say, 3 vinyls, here they are, all 3 of them, and the label itself is, there you go, I don't know if you can see that. Oh, I'll tell you what, I'll hold it the right way up for you. See if you can see that. There you go. So it's beautifully packaged, this particular set. There are a number of different versions. I think there's one with a 3D front on it, and the various packages, signed ones and stuff like that. This is a standard US pressing, which I'm very keen, very pleased to own. And for me, it was a really good way to see off what had been musical history, or what still is a wonderful part of musical history. I was fortunate enough to go and see them on this tour. I saw them in Melbourne, Australia. What can you say? They still delivered the same way they always had. Ozzy just jumping around like he was still in his 20s, although I think he needed a bit of help with the words this time around. Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler just locking it down. Immense power, immense strength, musicality. The fact they've been playing together for years shows. I mean, it was just, they are so well locked in. And Tommy, I have to say, for a new boy coming into a lineup like that, did an amazing job too. So full credit to him. It would have been great to see Bill there, of course, but Tommy did a fantastic job. So look, that is a brilliant live album. Certainly better than the first one that didn't come out, if you know what I'm saying, if you've been following me. And that really concludes, well, it does conclude my Black Sabbath album collection. As I say, I do have quite a few on CDs. However, I do have one more little Black Sabbath treat for you, which I'll do in a little mini episode coming up, hopefully in the next couple of days, before we move on to the next major section of my record collection, which is also predominantly box sets. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. In the meantime, thank you. I've received a couple of comments and feedback from people on the feedback here. Really enjoyed, lovely to hear from you. Thank you for the positive comments. I really appreciate it, because it feels like I'm talking to myself here most of the time, so any reassurance that I'm not going completely crazy is very welcome. So please subscribe, like, do all those bits and pieces down at the bottom. You know how it all works. In the meantime, stay grumpy. Thanks for your attention. I'll see you all soon. Bye bye now.